Welcome to FiST Chat, your source for news and discussions in film science and technology, hosted by Steve Kern and Ben Warner. Visit our website at fistchat.com. Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the podcast where we discuss all things related to film science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. Hello, FiST Chat fans. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about an interesting sort of technology today, photonic radars, which was mentioned on the ABC in the science section, mainly as sort of a response to obviously the big headline story about the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. And this article covered, it was some Italian researchers who were looking at these photonic radars, which work differently to traditional radar, by using short bursts of light to produce a signal that can not only detect an airplane mid-flight, but can also cover a wider territory and communicate with the plane at the same time. In essence, it can, I guess, provide more information about what's there. It's like, well, I guess in a crude sense, it's providing more resolution, if for lack of a better description.
Yeah, I guess this is an interesting thing with MH370 is that, people find it hard to believe that a plane could go missing, even though it's missing in a gigantic piece of ocean.
Yeah.
We do know where it is, kind of. We don't actually know where it is, but we know roughly where it is because of just some handshake signals between the plane's engines and the satellites above. So everyone's now saying, well, what could we have done to make sure we knew where the plane was? Photonic radar is something that would do that because effectively satellites have got the technologies to track a plane in the same way that you would normally with radar, except by shooting a laser beam at it, you can get all sorts of information: altitude, speed, direction, heading. And that can be done. The more often that signaling is done between, say, a satellite with a laser radar and the plane, the more information you have, which would just give you more information as to where the plane might be at any given point.
So there would also have to be capacity to put maybe like a receiving device or something on the plane itself as well. Wouldn't that would that impact or greatly improve things, or is this just more that the radar itself does it?
Well, you see, this is what's interesting. I have actually seen a laser radar in action on a much smaller scale with for robots. So what will happen typically if you have robots moving around, say, an area the size of a football field, you would set up 4 radars in the corner of each of the football field, and then you might have obstacles. But those radars would spin and they build a pattern of the obstacles, and the robots then use that as a map to navigate around the obstacles in that particular area. The way the sort of radar they seem to be talking about here would work would be exactly the same. So it's just shooting out beams of light, and just like traditional radar, if it hits something that's not the ground or not, the earth or whatever it is, it will map it. And it'll shoot out enough beams so that it will see, perhaps that there's this piece of metal that's shaped like a plane flying 10 kilometres above the earth.
Yeah.
And that's how they know where it's going. They don't necessarily need to have a direct link with the plane. But however, if a transponder was on, which MH370s had been turned off or disabled for whatever reason, you could still, if you knew roughly where the plane was, or if you were scanning the skies, you might see it. The great thing about photonic radar is it's light, effectively lasers. You can shoot many, many beams in many directions, and that's how you can build a picture of what's around.
So I'm guessing, obviously, they're still working on it and several years away from putting it into place. But I would think that precision would have to play a part in the type of data that it would have to create, considering how many planes are up there, or even just objects in general. That would be, up in the air. That you'd have to be able to discount certain things.
Absolutely. And look, and the technology is there, is how to implement the technology in this particular case to make this radar work.
Yeah.
I mean, as we've said, we can't find MH370 because it's lost in an area, half the size of Australia. I mean, that's a huge amount of area to go looking for something the size, of a,
Not to mention that the weather conditions don't help over the ocean.
Exactly. So, you would need to know where the plane was to start with anyway. But, for instance, the plane's engines were signaling to the satellites that are above. And remember, there are plenty of satellites above the Earth. If they have a signal like a transponder or like an engine ping or something like that, a laser would simply lock on to that object as it's moving because it would identify it as a plane, and then it would just return the data like that. And that's effectively how they'd watch the plane. You wouldn't be trying to scan like you would with traditional radar, huge areas, and look for something in there. This is purely for tracking and observing. And this, very interestingly, this technique is already basically in play now for things on an atomic scale. So when we use atomic microscopes, say to look at molecules or see how they fold and or what might be going on in a small chemical reaction, these are exactly the same principles, just employed on a much, much larger scale.
Well, just on that, the ABC article was mentioning that, like how you're saying, this actually isn't a new idea. It's just that these Italian researchers in the project that they're working on are bringing these ideas to radar and the concepts of radar. And despite the fact that obviously there are a lot of engineering bugs that they'll have to sort of iron out, it looks promising for future use in terms of tracking all the planes in the air and all that sort of thing. However, that the one obvious point is that it still doesn't help you really if the plane does go missing and crashes, or whatever happened in the case of MH370, is that maybe they might be able to have tracked it, but if they lost it for whatever reason, you still end up in the same situation in the sense that of what's happening now.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think we live in a society now where we expect all sorts of answers to everything because 99.999% of the time we get them. So when we get something that can't be answered anymore, we don't deal with it very well. Unfortunately, the planet, even though it's ever shrinking, still is a very big place, and a plane, no matter how big it is, isn't very big compared to the planet. If it goes missing, it's very hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we might move on. It's quite interesting, all of that. I'm always fascinated by new technologies that it kind of starts feeling like we're moving into a Star Trek world when we start talking about this sort of thing, that having so much control over, I guess, vast areas over our planet and that sort of thing. And you wouldn't think things like this would have been possible, even a decade or two ago. And it just proves how fast the technology is moving.
And I think even just to recap on last week's episode, I mean, who would think that another 10 years or so that we might be having pills that combat, age-related diseases? I think, the way all of these technologies come into our lives now seem very subtle because we're always waiting for the next show-stopping iPad, iPhone, or whatever it is, but they're there, they're happening now, and they're going to change things in huge ways, and we might not even notice a lot of these changes in the short term. Yeah. And then one day we'll wake up and just take them all for granted anyway.
Or maybe we're taking it for granted already if you think about our current mobile device generation.
I think so. I really do think so. Just as a bit of an aside, I saw a very funny article this week. Well, I thought it was funny, with some guy claiming there was nothing left to invent. Well, if that's his attitude, he can check out now.
Yeah, that's right. Alrighty, we'll move on to our news bites now. Now this one from Variety.com. There was a Shanghai conference. Digital realities confront Chinese film directors. Senior Chinese film industry leaders face many new challenges to their still maturing business models, and China's becoming they already had a big industry anyway, but it's becoming bigger as it goes along, with much more higher budget films being made, and sort of going down the Hollywood route, especially with Hollywood co-investing and co-producing with China. But the interesting thing that was in this particular that happened at this conference was that there was the discussion over the future theatrical experience, the idea that it would be increasingly reserved for IMAX and experience-based movies, which is kind of what's happening with Hollywood at the moment. And the question of whether or not there was one of the filmmakers there was questioning whether it was still actually worth investing in big movie stars and directors when you could make these movies on budgets of less than 3 million and make an absolute killing, especially in a country like China where there's just such a huge audience that you're just guaranteed virtually, if you market it properly, to get a huge return out of it.
Well, it's brilliant, isn't it? Like, if you're in that position, I think it's a very exciting time for the Chinese industry just because of the growth, just because they're learning the craft. If we take the business side out, I mean, as you say, they've got a pretty good model there for guaranteed for success if you're in the right position, to use it and get the right marketing budget. But I just think it's such an exciting time there because they've got technology and they've got people who genuinely probably love the craft and maybe aren't yet quite so Hollywoodized. I don't know. So the opportunities are definitely there.
What's interesting is that they are starting to bring on board, I guess, the best of Hollywood techniques to some bigger budget films. And there's been a couple of films that I've seen just in the last few years where, they look like Hollywood films, but with, a Chinese sort of bent to it. So, which is what you would expect. And it's just
no different to Red Dog in Australia.
That's right. So yeah, exactly. You see like these traditional Chinese stories almost in effect given the Hollywood treatment. But within China.
Yeah, I just think that the fact that they can do all of that. I mean, Bollywood, for instance, is a very specific style of filmmaking that's Hollywood and Bollywood together, but it's very traditional. Whereas I think the Chinese experience, they're very much into the supernatural, the superhero. They're also into the big stories, the fables, the history. And it's just great to see that they now have, the ability and the expertise within their own country to start to culturally to present their own visions of film. I think that to me is the most exciting thing about it. It's a bit like the golden years of Hollywood, which captured that for America.
Yeah, exactly. Right, we'll move on to our science news bite now from the ABC. Continental movement may be speeding up, and I always love topics to do with tectonic plate shifting, simply because it reinforces this notion of how much our planet is changing, and even though we don't see it, day by day, so to speak, over millions of years, and obviously hundreds of millions of years, the planet's changed so much, and this is just sort of another sort of finding, I guess, that that things may be changing quicker than what we thought.
Yeah, well, I think as always we wake up and the sun came back up, and today's like yesterday, so tomorrow will be the same, but it ain't. Over longer periods of time, we know things change. And I don't think people generally are very comfortable with either the idea of change or stepping back and looking at the perspectives around us. But our planet does change. It changes in all sorts of ways, naturally, but also due to our presence here on the planet. So, these are just nice, gentle reminders that, what we've got today wasn't always here and might not be there tomorrow.
I personally would have liked to have seen an Earth that just had one massive continent on it, like it did back in the day. But I don't think we'll be around to see that. But it would have been fascinating to see.
Could happen again. You never know. I just don't know if it would want to be a place we'd want to live.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would have liked to. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen the supercontinent myself.
Yeah. And finally, now our tech news bite from Yahoo.com. And we had to throw in a World Cup topic because I've been watching a few of the games and it's been quite fun to watch. Australia's been doing really well, apart from the fact that they've had to go now. But I think they've shown their stuff against some tough opponents.
Yeah.
But this one here, France gets first World Cup technology goal, and there was some technology implemented during the World Cup to assist umpires in in terms of whether goals are scored or not. And again, it's just so many sports implement this sort of thing, like a camera at the goal line to see if it actually went in or not, and caused all sorts of controversy during this particular game. What do you think, Steve? Do you think I don't know if I'd rather, I don't know, the umpire take care of it, but because if they put enough of these cameras in, they won't even need umpires eventually.
Look, this is the issue at the end of the day for all sports. And, this particular issue about the goal line goes back 50 years now to the 1966 England-Germany final where, was it a goal, wasn't it? And, there's still people today analysing the film, with opinions on either side. I think perhaps for soccer or football, as it's known as the world game, it might work because the goal is contained. There's a net at the back of it. I think everyone has to remember whether you see these hawkeyes in a football goal or whether you see them on a tennis court or whether you're looking at hawkeye on a cricket pitch, they are only estimates. However, the one thing I would say is that in the soccer goal, because of its size and proximity for the equipment, it's likely to be more accurate. There have been many goals that probably should have been goals disallowed over the years. I'd say that in this instance, because there's no one else to really adjudicate in soccer, I'd say it's good technology. But there are plenty of sports where they try to do this. Yeah. And really, if it can't be definitive and if the public don't trust the outcome, then there's no point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at least there wasn't any doubt with Tim Cahill's goal during the last game. That was one of the most spectacular goals you're likely to see. So it was quite good to watch. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. So thanks again for the chat.
Anytime. Thanks, FiST Chat fans. Keep enjoying the World Cup.
Absolutely. So don't forget our website, FiSTChat.com. You can get all of our links there, subscribe to all of our channels and whatnot. We've got our ebook, The FiST Report, at FiSTReport.com, hosted on Amazon. We've got the 2012 and 2013 editions available for you to have a look at, and they help to support the show. We've got our weekly blogs, photography on Instagram and Flickr, and if you think anyone's interested in our weekly discussions on film science and technology, then feel free to send them to our website. We'd appreciate that. So that's it for this episode, so we'll catch you next time.